Here in London, Bloomberg is hosting a sovereign debt conference to assess the wider battle against runaway debt. And joining me live from that conference now is Moritz Kraemer, head of Sovereign Ratings Group at Standard & Poor's. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I actually wanted to start by asking you about the UK because, of course, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has now delivered his emergency budget outlining spending cuts. How does this plan affect the UK's economic outlook?
Well, as you will be well aware, we've had the rating at Standard & Poor's for the UK on a negative outlook since about a year ago. This has to do with the huge task of consolidating the public finances, and this budget is one step on the way. Clearly, more steps need to be taken. This is a multi-year effort, and while this effort is underway, the outlook for the economy, of course, is, as in other countries, somewhat clouded by the necessity to cut back on public spending, which will take demand out of the economy.
So this budget may not necessarily keep the country's AAA credit rating safe?
Well, I think it's a little bit early to speculate about this. I mean, we've only seen the budget coming out. It's now upon us as a rating agency to analyze in close detail and scrutinize the measures and see to what extent we expect that these measures can be implemented as they've been announced. This is a somewhat complex task which takes more than a day.
That's interesting because do you think this deficit reduction plan is realistic? Because I've been speaking to people who've been saying that they won't be able to achieve these targets necessarily in 5 years, that it will likely take longer. Is that your view?
Well, I think it's not really decisive whether it takes 4 or 5 or 6 years. I think what is very important is a clear path and a clear trend reversal in the debt trajectory, not only of the UK, but in other countries in the Eurozone, for example, as well. So what we would want to see as investors as well is sort of a clear plan over the medium term how to get the situation under control. Now, this budget is clearly sort of a very austere budget, which has no resemblance to the budgets we've seen before, but that is required by the situation. And at the end of the day, as in other countries, it's a question of political will. We just had the report from Paris. It's all a question to what extent the government will be able and willing to push these things through against popular opposition.
You mentioned the Eurozone there. How do you assess the prospect of a double-dip recession in the region?
Well, we have a pretty dim view on the growth prospects of the EU and the growth potential in the medium term, because we have seen a leveraging up and a credit boom which has lasted almost a decade, and a lot of deleveraging in private sector households. But also, of course, in government sector households, it's also in the government budgets is coming up. And that will mean that the drivers of growth in the past 10 years will disappear and indeed go into reverse. So a lot of it will depend on whether the economies will be able to restore their competitiveness to create a more balanced path of economic expansion.
And Mr. Kraemer, just how difficult is it going to be to do that at a time when many European countries are cutting back?
It's quite difficult. It's a huge challenge. I think we must not underestimate sort of the task ahead at all. We have accumulated imbalances and in some cases excesses for many years, for a decade almost, and it will take a similar amount of time to reverse this. So we have indeed a pretty poor growth potential in many countries, especially at the periphery, which makes fiscal consolidation all the harder. We also cannot count in the near future on sort of inflation debasing the real value of the debt, because we're looking, other than tax increases on VAT, etc., we're looking at a pretty deflationary environment. So the task will require a lot of stamina from politicians.
And Mr. Kraemer, I just wanted to briefly ask you, we had some interesting comments from billionaire investor George Soros saying that Germany's fiscal policy right now is somewhat selfish, that it could potentially plunge the Eurozone into crisis, that the austerity measures could plunge the region into a deflationary spiral. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that this is a raging debate, obviously. I would say to that there is not very convincing or compelling evidence that increasing the fiscal deficit is a sustainable growth strategy. You can do that when you come from a strong position.
Yes.
But most governments in Europe are really maxed out at the time. And if you had further loosening,
well,
this would undermine
Moritz Kraemer,
confidence
thank you
further.
so much. We appreciate your time.